when lockdown first happened back in March, I was really interested to see there was a lot going on looking at the impact of no schooling on children, and so what was actually the impact of children not attending church on their faith. And it was really interesting to spend some time looking in depth at what churches were providing during that time. And some of the things that I found surprising that we could, I think, improve slightly, which would make a big difference, was this thing of how can we make it more collaborative, so that rather than it being a passive experience of children watching like they do with TV, how can we make that into a faith exploration and a thing that the children engage with together? But also as part of that collaboration and joint kind of working, how could we include families more as a whole? So if children are sitting at home with their family, with their parents, and they have questions or they have ponderings or they're considering things they want to pray for or they would like prayed for, how could we facilitate parents and children to do that together at home? For example, I saw some churches were saying, right, pause your video now and spend a few minutes discussing this question with your parents, or pause your video now and spend a few minutes praying together. And I think it's providing easy opportunities like that for families to do things together, rather than it being, all right, you must find a time to sit down together and read a Bible story. But actually, if we can just do it as part of our church services, to say, just hang on a sec, do a bit of time there, or perhaps saying, later as a family, can you discuss this more together, and so on. So I think if we can use that position that we have as churches and as children's leaders and so on to encourage parents and children to discuss and to pray together, I think that's really, really helpful. But I think also thinking about the personal side of it, so an awareness, as we're all aware, everyone's experiencing life differently at the moment, children and families as well. And so actually, how can we as churches listen to families and listen to children? What are their exact needs? What are their exact faith issues at the moment? What are they thinking and pondering and praying about at the moment, so that actually we as church workers can support children and families in that way? But also, how can we speak into those ways in a more precise way? And that's very challenging with technology as it is and everything. But I think if we're creative, we can think about some of those things of how we can be more personal, rather than just a one-size-fits-all faith experience for children. And so I think that's very much what was coming through, this sense that we need to be listening to families. We need to be realistic about our pressures and stresses that we're putting on families. So as a parent myself, I've got gazillions of things that I'm trying to juggle all the time. And so sometimes it's not easy for me to say, all right, let me find 15 minutes. Have the kids watched church yet this week? I don't know. But how can we actually facilitate families without adding pressure, but to provide easy opportunities for them to just discuss a few things around the table, or to do a quick prayer as they're driving off somewhere, and these kind of easy opportunities, really. So that was some of the key findings and ideas that were coming through.
In terms of youth work in Luton, which is where Youthscape is based, the team have just done a small piece of research asking churches what the impact has been on the ground numerically with young people since the start of lockdown. And they've actually seen a 2/3 drop off in terms of numbers of young people. A third of those came back after the initial lockdown, but time will tell what this new lockdown is going to mean for young people in church. For some young people, it's simply too challenging to meet online, and they're not willing really to engage with it, or it's come at a really bad time in terms of their faith formation and development. One of my big concerns with this season is that many young people are at a very significant crossroads in their life and in their faith journey. I remember being 15 and feeling like there was a sense in which there were two paths that I could walk. There was a path where I could keep going with church, keep going with faith, or I could just bow down to peer pressure, be cool with my friends, and go a different way. And I decided at that time that I was going to keep going with church and continue exploring faith when I was 15. And I think for many young people, if they find themselves at that crossroads during this time of lockdown, I think on top of what is already a really challenging time in terms of faith development, in terms of being a teenager, I think it must just be, it adds an extra dimension, an extra challenge. But there is something else that makes it really hard during lockdown. And I've written a bit about this for an article on the Youthscape website. And that is that faith is performative. And what I mean by that is that faith, that belief can lead to action, but actually that action also leads to belief. And if we don't have opportunities to participate in faith, if we don't have opportunities to pray out loud, to sing out loud, to talk with others about faith, to hear about how other people make sense of faith, then actually we can find that we don't really believe anymore. And that word performativity, it doesn't necessarily mean performing or pretending, but it originally comes from thinking about language. So we might say that when God says, "Let there be light," that's a performative statement. It creates new realities as God speaks those words. And in the same way, as we pray or as we sing, I certainly find that it's as I pray something that I start to believe it. Or I might start a prayer thinking, do I really believe that God can heal this person or that person? But it's as I'm praying it that I think, yeah, come on, God can heal, God can do this. And I believe I have enough faith in this moment to pray that prayer. And so I think that's incredibly challenging for young people who maybe haven't prayed out loud, haven't sung out loud, haven't had any kind of corporate expression or chance to participate in anything to do with faith, to perform their faith in this season, and maybe don't have rhythms of personal prayer or devotion yet. I think in the first lockdown, we were all trying to replicate what we do offline in an online space. And I was having a conversation with Andy Root recently, who's a youth ministry in theology. And he was saying that Zoom has all of the suck factor, but none of the spirit. You know, it's a functional thing. It means we can do these sorts of things. It means that we can make meetings happen. But in terms of encountering the spirit of the other, encountering the human spirit, it's so much harder in an online space. What are the opportunities online where we can actually create something that is not just a poor equivalent of the offline space, but actually could be a whole new kind of place, a new way of being together? And I think one of those for me is prayer. Zoom has made prayer more possible than it was if we were having to meet physically in a building. And one of the other great things about prayer is that you have your eyes closed. And one of the key drivers in sort of Zoom fatigue is having to watch yourself online. If we can create opportunities for participation, enabling young people to co-create the times that we have together, facilitating some kind of corporate reality, even in an online space, I think that's more easy actually, or it's easier with smaller churches because you can do more via Zoom. There's more chance for participation. I think it gets really hard the bigger you are actually as a church. And particularly if things are mostly live streamed, then it's very much a one-way dynamic. I think wherever possible, trying to share stories of what faith really means in real life, not just in an abstract or kind of disconnected sense, but what it means to live as a Christian in the midst of all of the complications and complexities of these sorts of times and questions. None of us have the answers, but I think just making it okay to say that as well probably is good for young people to hear.